Hello, my name is Reiko Osoroshi. On this channel, I introduce Japanese ghost stories. Today's ghost stories are a double feature of Hyou-se Uzumaki doll and Pandora Forbidden Empress. Hyou-se Uzumaki doll. A story from high school days. During my sophomore year of high school, I had the opportunity to go on a club training camp to a remote facility deep in the mountains of a certain prefecture. The location was quite nice, with tourist hotels and convenience stores situated about 500 to 700 meters away from us. Apart from that, there was nothing else around. However, I distinctly remember how excited and exhilarated we were. One evening during the camp, feeling a bit bored, we obtained permission from our club advisor to make a trip to a nearby convenience store. A group of around 10 of us cheerfully headed out. As we walked, we realized that during the daytime we hadn't noticed a building resembling a house located behind our training facility. The building had no lights on, and while it seemed like an empty or abandoned house, we guessed it could be a vacation home or something of the sort. One of my friends, feeling adventurous, suggested that we explore the building later. However, it was getting late, and we didn't want to risk getting reprimanded by our club advisor. So we decided to think about it after we finished our shopping and returned to the training facility. On our way back from the convenience store, one of our younger members suddenly brought up something strange. They claimed that the entrance of the aforementioned building was slightly ajar, and from there, a child was peering out at us. We all laughed it off, teasing the younger member, saying it was a cliché horror movie scenario. But when the younger member insisted, dead serious, I really saw it. We began to feel a little uneasy. We decided to check it out just to be sure, and as we approached the building, we saw that the door was closed, no one was around, and everything seemed normal. Jokingly, we continued to tease the younger member as we headed back to the training facility. Once back at the facility, from the second-floor hallway, we could catch a glimpse of the first floor of that same building through the trees. While my friend and I were discussing whether what we saw was actually the building, the door of the house creaked open ever so slightly. It was so dark that we could barely make out anything. But what we did see was the head of what appeared to be a child peeking out from behind the door, staring at us. Did you see that? My friend and I simultaneously witnessed this unsettling sight and fell into silence. My friend was the first to speak up. "Hey, isn't that?" He trailed off, obviously shaken. I was more stunned than scared, my thoughts freezing up at the sudden turn of events. "The child is looking at us, right?" I could only manage to reply with that. At that moment, laughter echoed from a room behind us. My friend and I were startled and jolted back to our senses. I whispered, "Isn't this getting pretty creepy? We're seeing it clearly, right?" My friend said, "I'm going to grab my phone and take a picture," and dashed off to his room. Soon, students from the camp, there were about 60 students in total from different schools, gathered in the second-floor hallway, curious about the commotion. Word had spread quickly. The childlike figure still seemed to be peering at us from the door, only showing its head. The hallway became quite chaotic, and even our advisors arrived, wondering what was going on. As the first witnesses, my friend and I explained what had happened. Just as we were recounting the events, some students who were looking out of the window suddenly exclaimed, and we heard a faint sound. Thud. The door had closed. By the time our advisors looked outside, the door was shut, and the figure had disappeared. All that remained was the seemingly ordinary house, unlit in the darkness. Naturally, our teachers were skeptical, but two younger teachers with an adventurous spirit agreed to check it out. They headed to the back of the facility. As we watched from the window, the two teachers with flashlights appeared. They were by the entrance of the house, seemingly attempting to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. They even called out, "Is anyone there?" but received no response. After about 5 minutes, they returned. Some students had taken pictures with their phones, but the images were not convincing evidence due to the poor quality and the darkness. We were instructed by the teachers to go to bed already, and return to our assigned rooms. That night, we couldn't sleep well due to the lingering unease. We debated whether to check things out further, either right away or during the daytime. As we discussed this, our room's window was suddenly knocked on loudly. Bang, bang. We saw a figure outside the window. We were still shaken from earlier, and from outside came a voice, "Hey, can you open up?" We opened the curtains, and there were 5 students from the other school we had befriended during the day. Apparently, they had climbed up a narrow ledge outside the window, which was about 20 centimeters wide, to reach our room. With the 5 of them inside, they explained they had a similar experience and were planning to visit the same house, inviting us along. Having decided, we all agreed to go on this test of courage. The group consisted of students from my school me, A, B, and from the other school C, D, and E. The others came up with various excuses and, in the end, didn't show up. The 5 of us exited through the protrusion by the window, ensuring we wouldn't be spotted by the teachers. We briefly stepped out onto the road to avoid being seen, then took a roundabout route towards the mysterious house. The area around the house was visible from the second-floor hallway of the camp facility. Some of the remaining students agreed to use flashlights to signal from the hallway if anything unusual happened during our exploration. As we approached the house, it seemed even creepier. Though we couldn't see it from a distance, the walls were covered in moss, ivy was entwined everywhere, and all the visible windows were boarded up. It looked like a place that had been abandoned for quite some time. C, A, and B initially went to check around the house. Though I knew it wouldn't open, I casually turned the doorknob and, surprisingly, the door swung open easily. I quickly called the 3 back, and we decided to venture inside. Entering the house, the summer humidity made the indoor air musty and moldy. Despite the dust and mildew, the interior seemed undisturbed, without any signs of ransacking. The lack of furniture contributed to a sense of spaciousness. While exploring the ground floor, he suddenly said, "Did you hear laughter from upstairs?" We strained our ears, but couldn't hear any laughter. I teased E, suggesting it might have been his imagination. However, E was curious and wanted to check. Since we hadn't finished exploring the ground floor, we reluctantly split into groups of 3. With one group continuing on the first floor and the other ascending to the second floor. For grouping, my schoolmates A and B, and I remained on the first floor, while students from the other school, C, D, and E, headed upstairs. We planned to rendezvous at the staircase if anything happened. After a while, a sudden burst of bright laughter echoed from the second floor. Soon after, panicked voices of C and D rang out, "Hey E, what's happening?" "Hey." Hearing this, we rushed upstairs to find the 3 huddled in the farthest room. Laughter was erupting from E, who faced the window and continued to laugh heartily. Beside him, C and D had pale faces and were desperately shaking and slapping E. As we gathered around E, I finally grasped the gravity of the situation. E was laughing uncontrollably, but his expression was blank. Tears streamed from his eyes, and I noticed a strange smell. He seemed to have wet himself. He laughed as if he couldn't see us at all. As we called out to E, trying to bring him back to his senses, B, the most composed among us, suggested, "We can't leave E like this. Let's carry him back to the campsite." So, we lifted E's limbs and shoulders and started carrying him outside. But then, we encountered a problem. B, who tried to open the door, nervously exclaimed, "It won't open." Panic started to creep in. Despite our collective effort, the door that had easily opened before was now unyielding. A, the strongest among us, even attempted to tackle the door, but it remained stubbornly shut. As we exchanged bewildered glances, we faintly heard from upstairs. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. It was a mechanical, monotonous sound. It seemed that the source of the voice was the child we had encountered earlier. However, something was off. I quickly realized what was wrong. The child's head was visible, but the rest of the body wasn't. It was as if only the head was sticking out, even though someone leaning over the railing would have shown their shoulders too. While I pondered this, C urgently pulled me, saying, "Hey, snap out of it. We need to get out of here. It's dangerous." He dragged me into the living room. For an instant, I had been lost in thought, but apparently, the other four had been carrying E into the living room. Smashing a window, and breaking through the boarded-up space. I had remained fixated on the child's face above. Not comprehending fully, I joined the others, and we carried E out. Despite being outside, we could still hear, "Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee." The voice was still echoing from inside the house. We carried E, and D went to fetch the teachers from the campsite. Afterwards, E was taken away by an ambulance. We received a severe scolding from the teachers, and due to this incident, the camp was abruptly cancelled. Around noon, as we were getting ready to leave, about 10 cars arrived at the campsite. Around 20 men, some appearing to be in their middle age and some older, along with what seemed to be local firefighters, got out of the cars. They engaged in a conversation with our advisor teachers and then proceeded to put up ropes and some kind of makeshift barriers around the area, near the infamous house at the back of the campsite. When we asked the teachers what was happening, they didn't explain anything. They simply left on the bus without providing any answers. E stayed in the hospital for about 2 days. Afterward, he was taken to another location, and 4 days later, he returned as if nothing had happened. Later, we learned that E had no recollection from the moment he entered the house until the day before he returned. On the night E came back, I was lying in my room, messaging on my phone, when for a brief moment, I thought I heard that voice again. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Startled, I sat up, opened the curtains, and looked outside, but there was nothing unusual in the usual scenery. I thought, was it just my imagination? And, getting up, decided to go downstairs to get a drink. My house has an L-shaped layout, and my room is situated over the garage. I took a bottle of tea from the refrigerator and went upstairs. Just as I reached the top of the stairs, I could glimpse a small section of the roof of my room through a gap in the curtains of the window right there. Then, I saw something on the roof. Given recent events, I was extremely anxious, but I mustered the courage to cautiously open the curtain a little and peer outside. On the roof was a child dressed in traditional Japanese clothing, sitting cross-legged with hands placed on their knees. As strange as this sight was, it didn't end there. The child's body was slightly bent forward, as if they were peering down. But from where the head should have been, there extended a long, straight pole-like object about 1 meter long. At the end of this pole-like extension was the child's head, peering into my room through the window. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. The voice could be faintly heard through the window. I was so overwhelmed by the events that I couldn't even speak. I retreated and went downstairs. I briefly considered waking my sleeping parents, but if I did and that thing was gone, I would feel incredibly embarrassed. For some reason, I thought that way and decided to spend the night in the living room downstairs. I think I heard the voice, hee hee hee, until a little past 4 a.m. The next morning, feeling fearful, I cautiously returned to my room. That presence was gone, and there was no unusual change in the room. Around noon that day, I received a phone call from one of the advisor teachers at home. They said they needed to discuss the recent incident and asked me to come to the school immediately. Considering what had happened the previous night, I had a bad feeling. I rushed to the school as quickly as possible. When I arrived at the school, I was called into a meeting room typically used by the student council. In the room were A, B, and even C and D. Additionally, the advisor teachers from both our school and C's school were present, along with a few unfamiliar middle-aged men. One of the advisor teachers began speaking. To summarize, E was showing the same symptoms again and had been taken to a certain place. The teachers then asked us, "Did anything strange happen last night?" I immediately remembered that thing from last night, and explained, well, during the middle of the night, I saw something strange peering into my room. A, B, C, and D didn't seem to experience anything unusual. Then C spoke up, "Hey, didn't you referring to me seem kind of spaced out, looking up at the stairs inside the house? Could that have something to do with it? Come to think of it." I recalled that moment and asked the others, "Hey, at that time, did any of you see or hear anything strange, like weird laughter or a child?" However, everyone else said they had heard the voice, hee hee hee, the whole time, but they only saw a child near the front door and didn't see anything inside the house. As we were having this exchange, one of the previously silent middle-aged men started to explain the details of the incident. His explanation was quite lengthy, so to summarize what we encountered was something called Hyou-se, apparently a yokai-like creature specific to this area. It rarely shows itself but occasionally appears on the roofs of pregnant or infertile couples' houses, where it laughs. This is considered fortunate as it's believed to ensure safe childbirth for pregnant women and grant children to infertile couples. However, for some unknown reason, every few decades, it turns malevolent and possesses and kills children. By the way, that house had no particular history or stories attached to it, it just happened to be where the Hyou-se had appeared. When the Hyou-se tries to possess and harm children, there's a countermeasure. One can create a barrier at the spot where the Hyou-se first appeared. Build a makeshift shrine, and offer prayers to prevent the attacks. That was what they were doing at the time we were leaving the campsite. The man continued. However, this time, something seemed off. Ordinarily, creating the shrine should have resolved the issue, but somehow, it managed to escape. E became a victim again, and what's more, it appeared to me. Moreover, the fact that the Hyou-se appeared beyond our village and its vicinity was unprecedented. The last time it had attacked a child was about 20 years ago, making this attack premature. Nonetheless, despite all the oddities, these events were happening in reality, so there was no denying it. We received a simple purification from a monk who came to the school, along with amulets, and were told we should be fine with these protections. As for E, they were being held at the temple for observation. And in the meantime, they planned to build another shrine and offer prayers to the Hyou-se once more. We were allowed to leave the school, but instead of going home with our parents, We decided to stay overnight together at my house, which was the closest to the school. Even though we were assured of safety, we felt that staying together would provide some comfort amidst our anxiety. That night, as we were playing games in our rooms, we heard a rhythmic knocking on the window. Thud. 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 As I explained earlier, my room was situated above the garage with almost vertical walls, making it nearly impossible for someone to climb up and knock on the window. Moreover, that window was the same one the child had peered into last night. Given the circumstances, everyone's faces tensed up. B tried to play it off, saying, "Come on, it's probably just a prank or the wind, right?" and attempted to open the curtains. In a panicked rush, I stopped B and explained the situation. The knocking on the window continued. D chimed in, "Maybe we should confirm what it is. It's scarier not knowing," suggesting we should find out what was causing the sound. It did make sense enduring a situation where an unknown force was knocking on the window all night seemed unbearable. We moved toward the stairs, slightly opened the curtains, and peered into my room through the gap. It was there. That thing from yesterday was indeed back. It extended what looked like a stick, similar to a neck, and peered into my room through the window, occasionally making a knocking sound against it. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. That same monotonous laughter-like sound was audible again. This was the source of the sound. It was an eerie sight. I hadn't noticed it yesterday, but it looked more like a doll in a kimono than a child. The head knocking against the window made a sound more like an empty doll than a human head. C muttered, "Didn't they seal it again today?" At that moment, my father noticed the commotion and came upstairs, asking, "What are you all doing?" Startled by my father's voice, I accidentally bumped his arm against the window, making a loud thud. The head at the end of it seemed to turn toward us with a faint kunk sound. We saw its face clearly. It had a bobbed haircut and a smiling doll-like face. However, it wasn't just an ordinary doll. While the face had the typical porcelain white skin of a doll, its eyes, supposed to be part of a smiling expression, were pitch black, devoid of any pupils. Its mouth was the same, lacking lips and instead having a gaping, crescent-shaped hole of pure darkness. Despite that, the curving of its eyes and mouth made it unsettlingly appear to be smiling. My father asked again, seriously, "What are you all doing?" and approached the window, throwing the curtains open. It swiftly hid behind the shadow of the roof and vanished from view. But it seemed my father also caught a glimpse of something being there for a brief moment. In a hurry, my father went downstairs and started making a phone call to somewhere on his mobile phone. It appeared he was trying to get in touch with the monk and the middle-aged men who had performed the purification during the day. After that, it never appeared again, staying hidden in the shadows. Morning came, and the middle-aged men from yesterday and the advisor teacher arrived at my house, along with others. Given the extraordinary situation, it was decided that we would all go to a nearby temple. Though everyone's parents had come to my house, the middle-aged men advised against involving the parents further, saying it might worsen the situation. So, only we went. We were taken in a car, wearing only what we had on, and set off. We arrived at the temple around noon. Upon entering the temple, we were greeted by E, who looked worn out in their tracksuit. According to E, various things had happened since then, but they were somehow managing at the moment. Entering the main hall, the monk and the middle-aged men from yesterday asked us to tell them in detail about last night's events. As we took turns explaining the situation, during the part about the doll-like figure, one of the men from yesterday interrupted, "Wait a minute. A doll? With a long neck? What are you talking about? He looked surprised. And when we provided a more detailed description of the figure we had seen, both he and the monk started discussing it, saying, "No, this doesn't sound like the Hyou-se at all. What's going on? Something's not right, there are too many inconsistencies." After a while, they explained the situation to us. In conclusion, it was a complete misunderstanding that we had been possessed by the Hyou-se. The entity that seemed to be following us was something entirely different. I thought to myself, isn't it a bit late for that now? The middle-aged man continued. When he first heard about the situation and the characteristics. Childlike figure. Laughter. Students acting strangely, laughing while crying. Near the village. He initially thought it might be Hyou-se, based on these circumstances. However, upon listening to the detailed story, it seemed that while some symptoms and behaviors resembled those of Hyou-se, the appearance was entirely different from the traditional accounts or past sightings. First of all, Hyou-se is described as a hairy, monkey-like creature about the size of a child. It doesn't wear clothes, doesn't have the characteristic bobbed haircut, and naturally, its neck doesn't stretch. Moreover, the laughter was not the mechanical soundless laughter we had described. Instead, even the term, laughter, might not be accurate, it was more akin to the cry of a monkey. We were utterly perplexed. To be honest, we had believed that coming to this temple would solve everything, but now we were faced with a situation where we had no clue what was happening. The room became heavy with an oppressive atmosphere, and after a while of silence, the monk spoke up. For now, there's no doubt that there's something malevolent present. There's a monk who specializes in these matters in a place not far from here. We'll call him for assistance. Please wait here in the reception room for a while. With that, the monk got into a car and left. We were led to the reception room and sat there in a daze. The middle-aged man was on the phone frequently, appearing to engage in a heated discussion. By evening, the monk returned with another monk in tow. As the first monk came back, the middle-aged man rushed to the monk, phone in hand, exclaiming, "It's turned into a big problem." As we were listening to the conversation, it seemed that another child from the village with the same symptoms as he had been discovered. They were planning to bring this child here. The monk from the temple said to us, "For now, we'll talk later. Please wait in the reception room where you were earlier." With that, they hurriedly walked toward the main hall, the two of them together. About 15 minutes later, a wagon arrived. From inside the car, we could hear the same unsettling laughter as when he was brought in. The car door opened, and a few adults and a middle school-aged child who, aside from the laughter, remained completely motionless, were brought out of the car and led into the main hall. For a while, we could hear both the echoing laughter and the chanting of sutras from inside the main hall. But this lasted only about 10 minutes before it subsided, and everything fell quiet. After another 15 minutes or so, the two monks entered the reception room where we were. They began to explain various things to us regarding the child who had just been brought in. They had laid out bedding for them in the main hall because of their extreme exhaustion, and the child was resting there. According to the monk who came to support us, judging from the details we shared and the condition of the child they brought in earlier, it seemed that the cause might not be a ghost or a supernatural creature, but rather some form of cursed object. While there wasn't any concrete evidence, there was a strong intuitive feeling pointing in that direction. With this introduction, the monk suggested that if they could sever the connection between the cursed object and us through prayers, things might improve. Additionally, if possible, they wanted to perform a memorial service for the doll. After this discussion, The monk informed us that if this approach worked, it could potentially resolve the situation. We were eager for a solution, so the conversation continued. Just before that, I had been enduring the urge to use the restroom. I explained the situation, and as it turned out, everyone else had been holding it in as well. In the end, all 6 of us ended up relieving ourselves together. On our way back from the restroom, as we were walking down the hallway leading to the main hall, we heard that same flat, eerie voice again, seemingly coming from nowhere. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Though we couldn't pinpoint the source, it sounded like it was very close by. C remarked, "It's nearby," and added, "It's quite close, isn't it?" Indeed, it was very close, though we couldn't see its form. At the back of our group, E and D suddenly shouted, "Watch out, quickly run to the main hall," while pointing upward near the windows. When we all turned to where they were pointing, there it was. Just like before, its head appeared from the roof. And it started laughing, facing us with that same unnerving black-eyed, mouthless expression while chuckling, "Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho." We bolted at full speed. Upon arriving at the main hall, the 2 monks and the previous man were waiting. It had just occurred to me that this man was likely the village chief. After explaining the situation, the monks immediately had us sit down and began chanting sutras. While they were chanting for a while, we suddenly heard that eerie laughter again, the same one we heard from my room, and that tapping sound, kotsu. Kotsu, echoed through the hall. We huddled together, trembling with fear. After a while, the sound ceased. I asked, "Is it over?" But before anyone could answer, the laughter started again. This time from the garden beside the main hall, growing fainter in the dusky light. Then, on the shoji screen, dimly lit by the setting sun, the head of that doll appeared. It was still swaying gently, emitting the same eerie laughter. At that moment, overwhelmed by fear, anxiety, and days of sleep deprivation, I reached my limit. Strangely, I started feeling angry rather than afraid when looking at the doll's figure. Its swaying form somehow agitated me, and I couldn't bear it any longer. Without further thought, I grabbed the iron candlestick from beside the monks, the lit candle still attached, pulled it out, and flung open the shoji screen. Right in front of me was the doll's face. For a moment, terror overcame me, but anger and frustration took the upper hand. Swinging the candlestick down at the doll's head, I yelled, "You've got to be kidding me." A cracking sound resonated as the candlestick's tip struck the doll's face, and it tumbled to the ground. I rushed outside, still barefoot, and once again swung the candlestick at the fallen doll. At that moment, a strange sensation began to grow in my mind. Still, the doll continued to emit that same emotionless laughter, "Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho." Despite there being no reason for it, I felt like laughing and crying at the same time. Tears streamed from my eyes involuntarily. It was clear that I was succumbing to the same situation as E and the others, but I couldn't stop swinging the candlestick at the doll. Later, I would hear that I was laughing hysterically while tears poured from my expressionless face. After a while, in the midst of this, the fire from the remaining candle on the candlestick seemed to have spread to the doll's clothing. And the doll began to smolder and catch fire. According to my friends, the doll's "ho ho ho, ho ho ho, ho ho ho" laughter mixed with my screams, blending with the darkening surroundings, creating a surreal atmosphere. Nevertheless, I continued to strike the doll while laughing and crying. It's not clear exactly where I struck, but suddenly there was a dull thud. At that instant, the strange emotion within me vanished. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say it abruptly deflated. In any case, my irritation towards the doll, the desire to laugh, and the urge to cry all vanished in an instant. I slumped to the ground, and my friends and the man approached me, concerned. The doll was no longer laughing or moving, but since it was still burning, my friends and the man extinguished it by throwing sand over it. For some unknown reason, I felt as if everything had been resolved, and a strange sense of relief washed over me. Amidst this commotion, the two monks had been continuously chanting sutras. The details about the doll or what remained of it would be investigated further the next day. It was placed in a box, marked with ritual papers, and enshrined in the main hall. Thanks to the kindness of the monks, we decided to stay overnight at the temple. The following morning, we were summoned to the main hall. Whether due to the sutras or my outburst, the exact reason was unclear, but it seemed that the issue had been resolved, at least temporarily. The decision was made to enshrine the doll in the temple and perform a memorial service for it. However, the mystery of what exactly the doll was remained unsolved. On the charred remains of the doll's torso, there were partially burned markings, indicating Kanban second year, and the name of the author, containing 6 characters. Additionally, from the faint traces of the remaining characters, the word Whirlpool doll could be deciphered, though not entirely certain. According to the monk, the true identity of the doll was still unknown, but it undoubtedly seemed to be some kind of cursed object. There were clear signs of some ritualistic patterns inscribed on the pole connecting the head and body of the charred remains. Afterward, up to the present day, including myself and the other members at that time, nothing significant seems to have occurred. The temple monks mentioned that they would inform us if they discovered the true identity of the doll. But despite several years passing, no such communication has been received. Pandora Forbidden Empress. This is a story related to something called kinku that was passed down in my hometown. I never fully understood how to read it, but among us, it was referred to as Pandora. The town where I was born and raised was a quiet and peaceful rural town. There weren't any prominent play areas. It was a rather desolate town. However, there was one thing that stood out remarkably. On the outskirts of town, along a road that stretched through endless rice fields, stood a solitary abandoned house. It seemed that nobody had lived there for a long time, and the house was quite run down. Amidst the rustic atmosphere of the countryside, this house exuded a distinctive sense of age. It could have just been another old abandoned house, but there was a reason it caught people's attention. One reason was the excessive reactions from the adults in town, including my parents. Just trying to talk about that abandoned house would lead to stern scolding, and at times, some of us kids were even slapped for it. Every child from every household faced the same treatment, myself included. The other reason was that, for some strange and mysterious cause, the abandoned house lacked a front door. There were windows and glass doors, but there was no entrance. If someone had lived there before, how did they enter and exit? Did they go in and out through the windows and glass doors? These enigmatic elements piqued our interest, and combined with the name, Pandora, that we had spontaneously given it, it became the hottest topic among us children at the time. At this point, I still didn't know anything about kinku. Most of us kids, including myself, were determined to find out what was inside. We wanted to explore it. However, the fact that our parents would get so angry just from talking about it made us hesitate to put our plan into action. The location was easily accessible for children alone, and there were no witnesses around. Probably, everyone had at least come to stand in front of the abandoned house once. For a while, we enjoyed the atmosphere and spent time there without incident. After a few months into my middle school years, a certain boy became interested in the Pandora story and expressed his desire to see it for himself. Let's call him A. A's family story was quite interesting. His mother was originally from our town but had married and moved to another prefecture. Due to a divorce, she returned to her hometown and her grandmother's house. A himself was new to the town, so he was completely unaware of the Pandora story. At that time, among my close friends B, C, and D, B and C were particularly close to A, so naturally, he became a part of our group. While the five of us were engaged in idle conversations, the word Pandora kept coming up, which piqued A's curiosity. Both my mom and grandma are from here. I wonder if I'd get scolded too if I heard that story? Getting scolded is the least of it. My parents would seriously hit me for this. Same here. It doesn't make any sense, right? As we explained Pandora to A, everyone started complaining about their parents. Once we finished the explanation, we shifted to the most crucial question: what could be inside the abandoned house? Does nobody know what's in there? No idea. I've never been inside, and even asking about it would get me in trouble. Maybe only our parents know? Well then, let's find out what they're hiding. Together. A said this with great enthusiasm. While initially hesitant due to the fear of parental scolding, the three of us were drawn into A's excitement. This was a way to finally let out our frustrations and, being swept up by A's enthusiasm, we all agreed in the end. During our subsequent discussions, D's younger sister, who usually tagged along when we played, expressed her desire to join us. So, with a group of 6, we decided to carry out the operation on a Sunday afternoon. On the appointed day, we gathered excitedly in front of the abandoned house. Strangely, each of us had brought backpacks filled with snacks, and we were all in high spirits. As previously mentioned, the enigmatic house was situated in the middle of rice fields, with no door and surrounded by nature. It was a 2-story house, but it was impossible to reach the windows on the second floor. Thus, the only way inside was to break the glass door on the ground floor. If it's just glass, it's no big deal to compensate. With this declaration, A smashed the glass door without hesitation and entered the house. Even if there was nothing inside, this would undoubtedly result in getting scolded. Nonetheless, we all followed him inside. The first floor turned out to be a living room. To the left was the kitchen. A corridor led to the front, where the bathroom and toilet were located, and on the right was the staircase leading upstairs, the area that would have been the entrance. Although it was daytime and relatively bright, the lack of an entrance gave the corridor a somewhat dim appearance. Despite the dilapidated exterior, the interior was surprisingly clean, or rather, empty. There was no furniture or any sign that someone had lived there. The living room and kitchen were quite spacious but otherwise ordinary. There's nothing here. It's just normal. I thought there would be something left behind. As we explored the empty living room and kitchen, the 3 boys began to munch on the snacks they had brought. Meanwhile, D's sister held hands with D and me as we prepared to go upstairs. However, as soon as we stepped into the corridor, D and I felt like our hearts had stopped. Along the corridor that extended to the left was the bathroom, and at the end was the toilet. Somewhere in the middle, there was a vanity table, and right in front of it stood a pole-like object. Hanging from the pole was hair. I'm not sure how to express this properly, but it was like a wig-shaped hairstyle, or more accurately, It looked as if a woman's long hair was hanging there, as if the person was sitting at the vanity table. I apologize if this description is unclear. Considering the average height, the pole was set at a position where the head would be, perfectly recreating the scene of a woman sitting in front of a vanity table. Goosebumps spread across my skin, and Dee and I were slightly panicked. What is this? What the heck is this? The three boys who followed us into the corridor were just as bewildered by the bizarre sight. Only Dee's sister seemed curious and confused. What the heck is that? Real hair? I don't know. Should we touch it? A and B suggested, but C and the rest of us urgently stopped them. Stop it. It's dangerous. It's creepy and there must be something weird about it. Yeah, quit it. Feeling fear from the decidedly abnormal scene, we retreated back to the living room. Though we couldn't see it from the living room, just looking towards the corridor was unpleasant. What should we do? We can't get to the second floor without passing through the corridor. I can't. It's too gross. Me neither. I have a bad feeling about this. C, D, and I were so taken aback by what we unexpectedly found that we had lost all desire to explore. Look, if we avoid looking at that, we should be fine. Even if something comes out on the second floor, we can just come down the stairs right here. Plus, it's still daytime. Both A and B seemed determined to see the second floor, and they urged us three reluctant ones to hurry. Even if you say that. As we exchanged glances, something suddenly clicked. Hey, D, where's XX-chan? Huh? We all realized it at the same time. Dee's sister was missing. We were standing right in front of the only entrance and exit, so it was impossible for her to have gone outside. Even though the living room and kitchen were quite spacious, we could see everything in one glance. Dee's sister was nowhere to be found. XX. Where are you? Answer us. Dee shouted desperately, but there was no response. Hey, maybe she went upstairs. With that one sentence, everyone's gaze turned to the corridor. No way. Why? What is she doing? Tears welled up in Dee's eyes as she shouted. Stay calm. Let's go upstairs for now. There was no time to be scared. We immediately rushed into the corridor and sprinted up the stairs. Hey, XX-chan? XX. Cut it out. Come out. While calling out to Dee's sister, we ascended the stairs, but there was no response. Once we reached the top of the stairs, there were two rooms. Both doors were closed. First, we opened the door right in front of us. It was the room with the windows we had seen from outside. Inside, there was nothing as expected, and Dee's sister wasn't there either. It's that way. We approached the other door and slowly opened it. Dee's sister was there. However, we were rendered speechless and frozen on the spot. In the center of that room was the exact same setup we had seen downstairs. A vanity table, a pole in front of it, and long hair hanging from it. Enveloped in a strange fear, we stood motionless, bewildered. Hey, sis, what's this? Suddenly, Dee's sister spoke and then did something outrageous. She approached the vanity table and opened the top drawer among the three. What's this? Dee's sister took something out of the drawer and showed it to us. It was a piece of paper with the characters, Jin-Hu, Forbidden Empress written on it, resembling a brush. We could only stare at Dee's sister without understanding the meaning. To this day, I don't know why we couldn't move immediately. Ignoring our confusion, Dee's sister calmly put the paper back in the drawer and closed it. Then, she opened the second drawer and took out its contents. It was exactly the same, a piece of paper with the characters, Jin-Hu, written on it. I couldn't comprehend anything anymore. I trembled uncontrollably, But Dee's sister immediately came to her senses and Dee ran over to her. Dee was almost in tears as well. "What are you doing?" She scolded her sister sternly, took the paper from her, and tried to close the drawer. The problem was that after taking out the paper, Dee's sister had immediately closed the second drawer. In her haste, Dee had mistakenly opened the third drawer, the bottom one. As soon as she opened it, Dee froze in place, staring at its contents. She was completely motionless, her gaze fixed on whatever was inside. What's going on? What is this? At that moment, we finally regained our ability to move. Just as we were about to rush over to them, there was a loud thud. Dee slammed the drawer shut. Then, to our astonishment, she lifted a lock of hair, about shoulder length, to her mouth and began to chew on it. "Hey, what's going on? Dee, get a grip." No matter how much we called out to her, there was no response. She just kept chewing on her own hair. Perhaps out of fear of her behavior, Dee's sister began to cry too. It was an extremely tense situation. "Hey, what the hell's happening? I don't know. What is this? Let's just get out of here and go home. I don't want to stay here." The three of us managed to carry Dee, and I grabbed Dee's sister's hand. We hurriedly left the house. Throughout the ordeal, Dee kept chewing on her hair, her actions driven by confusion and panic. All we knew was that we had to get to an adult. We rushed to my house, the closest to the vacant house, and I called out to my mother in a loud voice. Between my sobbing and Dee's sister's fear, the three stunned boys, and Dee's increasingly bizarre behavior, my head was spinning, trying to figure out how to explain everything. But before I could, my mother appeared, responding to my call. "Mom." As I tried to explain the situation while in tears, my mother suddenly slapped me and shouted at me. "You guys went there, didn't you? You went to that vacant house, didn't you?" Seeing the intensity in her expression, we could only nod desperately, unable to articulate our words. "You all wait in the back. I'm going to call everyone's parents right away." With that, my mother picked up Dee's sister and led her upstairs. "Forget about that child. She can never return to her former self, and you will never see her again. Besides," Dee's father continued with a somewhat sad expression, "you will forever be resented by that child's mother. We're not looking to assign blame for this incident. But, you saw how she reacted earlier, right? You mustn't have any further involvement with that child." With that, Dee's father left the room. We couldn't think straight. I'm not even sure how we managed the following hours. It was truly a long day. For a while after that, we tried to lead normal lives. From the next day onwards, neither my parents nor A's parents mentioned the incident. I never found out what happened to Dee. She seemed to have had personal reasons to be absent from school, and about a month later, she moved away. It seemed that other families were also contacted that day, as conversations about the abandoned house gradually dwindled. I heard that security measures were taken, such as sealing off the glass door, preventing entry. Since then, neither I nor A have gone near that abandoned house, and perhaps due to Dee's situation, we gradually grew distant. Our high schools were different, and we each left town. It's been over 10 years since then. I apologize for dragging you through such a long narrative with no real conclusion. But, in the end, we didn't find any answers. However, there's one last thing. Around the time I graduated from university, my mother received a letter from Dee's mother. I never got to know its contents, but my mother's words at the time still linger in my mind. Mothers always have choices they keep hidden for the sake of their children. If it were you in that situation, I think I would have made the same choice. even if it turns out to be the wrong answer. This is the story of a certain family lineage that has been passed down from mother to daughter through 3 ceremonies. First, let me explain about this lineage. In this lineage, daughters were considered their mother's property, and a certain ritual treated daughters as materials. Mothers gave birth to 2 or 3 daughters, and one of them would be chosen as the material. There might have been cases where boys were born, but I don't know what happened then. The chosen daughter would be given 2 names, and one of them, known only to the mother, would be kept secret for her entire life. Anticipating the possibility of the secret name being revealed, it was given a pronunciation entirely different from what the characters suggested. Even if someone recognized the characters, only the mother would know the correct pronunciation. Even when the mother and daughter were alone, the secret name was never used. This might seem similar to a taboo name, but it was a way to emphasize and prove that the daughter was the mother's property. Additionally, on the day the secret name was given, a dressing table was always prepared. It was a rule that, apart from the daughter's 10th, 13th, and 16th birthdays, the dressing table would never be shown to her. This was another preparation for the days to come. Without ever being called by their true name, the process to enhance the value of the material begins with the mother's education from early childhood. The daughter who wasn't chosen is raised in an ordinary manner. The full extent of this is something I can hardly discuss, as everything I heard made me nauseous just by listening to it. Among these, about a third revolved around animals, insects in particular, and cats. There's a reason for this. In this lineage, having relations with men was solely for the purpose of procreation. And once a sufficient number of daughters were born, the connection was severed. Despite this condition being stated in advance, there were some men who attempted to uncover the secrets of the lineage and its rituals. In response, starting from a certain generation, a method was devised where a curse would be transferred through a ritualistic act with a man. This caused all the grudges, like those of the cats they killed, to be transferred to the man. Consequently, calamities akin to curses would afflict the men's families who were involved. This ensured that the family's internal matters remained untouched. Due to these circumstances, animals, especially cats, were frequently used in this education. An abnormal education that molded twisted norms, warped values, and deviant preferences suitable for the material continued between mothers and daughters for 13 years over generations. Within this period, 2 of the 3 ceremonies took place. The first one occurred at the age of 10, when the daughter was led by her mother to the dressing table and instructed to provide her nails. It's at this point that the daughter becomes aware of the existence of the dressing table. The number and selection of nails to be provided, whether from both hands and feet, varied between generations. Providing, of course, meant removing them. The daughter would peel off her nails herself and hand them over to her mother, who would then place them, along with a paper bearing the daughter's secret name, into the top drawer of the dressing table. For the rest of the day, the mother would sit in front of the dressing table. This marks the first ceremony. The other one occurs at the age of 13, where similarly, the daughter is instructed to provide teeth in front of the dressing table. This also varies by generation. The daughter pulls out her own teeth, and the mother places them in the second drawer of the dressing table, along with a paper bearing the secret name. Once again, for the entire day, the mother sits in front of the dressing table. This constitutes the second ceremony. After completing these 2 ceremonies, the next 3 years until the age of 16 involve no education whatsoever. Suddenly, without any explanation, freedom is granted. This signifies that all preparations have been completed by the age of 13. By this time, most daughters have already become, as desired by their mothers, like living dolls, yet a significant number tried to live as ordinary girls, perhaps retaining a trace of their original emotions. Then, 3 years later, on the daughter's 16th birthday, the final ceremony takes place. This final ceremony involves the mother eating the daughter's hair in front of the dressing table. Rather than eating, the crucial aspect was absorbing it into her body. The daughter cuts nearly all her hair, to the point of being almost completely bald. Then, entranced, she puts the hair into her mouth and swallows it while gazing at the dressing table. The daughter remains in a daze. Eventually, after consuming all the hair, the mother speaks the daughter's true name. It's at this moment that the daughter hears her true name for the first and last time. With this, the ceremony is complete, and the purpose is achieved. The next day, the mother becomes like a deranged person, incessantly chewing her own hair, and remains isolated until her death. The being she becomes is literally a discarded shell of the mother, entirely different from the original. The mother in that place is akin to a balloon in human form, and her existence has reached a place no one has seen, heard, or could possibly know. Everything up to this point was a preparation to earn the right or divinity to go to that place, and the final ceremony grants this right. In this unknown realm, the mothers who have gained the qualification in the same way reside, forming a paradise that remains unsoiled. The purpose of this was to bring mothers who obtained the qualification through the final ceremony to this paradise, leaving behind a mere shell that continues to chew hair, thus gaining a new life. The remaining daughter is raised by her mother's sisters. The reason for giving birth to not just 1, but 2 or 3 children, was for this purpose. After the mother's departure, the aunts, who were raised normally, take care of the daughter. Liberated from the mother, the daughter engages with a man and gives birth when her hair returns to its original length. Then, she repeats the same cycle as a mother and heads toward the place where the mother awaits. This concludes the explanation of this lineage. In reality, this harmful tradition did not endure for long. Gradually, doubts began to creep in regarding this practice. Those doubts grew over time, leading the mother and daughter to search for the roles they should have naturally held. As this stance solidified within the family lineage, the harmful practice gradually faded away and eventually became forbidden. However, as something not to be forgotten, the customs of secret names and dressing tables were preserved. The secret names stood as a testament of the mother, while the dressing table was passed down as a celebratory gift. Slowly, interactions with the surrounding community increased, and individuals started building families as couples. And so, after some time had passed, in a certain year, a woman got married and became a wife. Her name was Yachio. She was born after the abandonment of the harmful tradition and had grown up in an entirely ordinary manner. Despite being beloved by those around her and leading a modest life, she found a suitable partner and married him after a long courtship. While she was somewhat informed about her family lineage by her mother, she didn't take particular interest. Several years after becoming a wife, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Takako. Adhering to her mother's teachings, she bestowed a secret name upon her daughter and acquired a dressing table identical to her own. It was believed that days of happiness would continue, but an anomaly occurred on Takako's 10th birthday. On that day, Yachio had gone to visit her parents, leaving only Takako and her husband at home. After completing her errands, when Yachio returned home in the evening, an unbelievable scene awaited her. Takako lay there without nails and teeth. Upon surveying the house, Yachio noticed a paper with Takako's secret name, which should have been safely stored, lying on the floor. Nails and teeth were scattered across Takako's dressing table. Her husband was absent. Without any understanding of what had happened, Yachio could only cling to her daughter's lifeless body. Neighbors who noticed the disturbance rushed over, but Yachio reportedly clung to Takako and wept. The confused neighbors, unable to comprehend the situation, decided to inform Yashio's parents, and some went in search of Yashio's husband. At this point, Yachio was left alone. That very night, Yachio lay down beside Takako. When the neighbors informed Yashio's parents and they learned of the scene, they remained composed. We can imagine. He must have attempted the ritual Yachio had mentioned. Since Yachio hadn't explained it in detail, he could only have had fragmented information, yet he waited until Takako turned 10. They said, heading towards Yashio's house. Upon arriving there, they found Yachio, who had been clinging to Takako and weeping, also deceased. The residents could only stand there in astonishment. Yashio's parents remained composed and instructed, "No one is to enter until we come out." They didn't emerge for quite some time. Yashio's parents remained composed and instructed, "No one is to enter until we come out." They didn't emerge for quite some time. After a few hours, they finally came out and announced to the residents, "We will perform a memorial for the two. There's no need to search for the husband. The reasons will become clear soon." With that, they forcefully dispersed the gathering. For the next few days, the whereabouts of the husband remained unknown. However, shortly thereafter, he was found lying in front of Yashio's house. It's said that his mouth contained a substantial amount of long hair. When the residents inquired about this situation to Yashio's parents, they explained, "Those who enter Yashio's house from now on will become like that. It's a curse of that nature. Those children are the new generation freed from the harmful tradition. It's regrettable that it turned out this way, but at least let them rest quietly." They instructed that Yashio's house be left as it was. Since then, as an act of homage to the couple, Yashio's house remained untouched. No one knew what lay within the house, but people abided by Yashio's parents' words and refrained from looking inside. And thus, it remained a place of tribute to the two for a long time. Later, due to reasons like deterioration, the house had to be demolished. It was then that the residents discovered what was inside for the first time. What they found were the same items we had seen, that dressing table and the hair. Yashio's house didn't have a second floor, so the items were lined up right in front as soon as you opened the entrance. How Yashio's parents managed this is unknown, but the hair remained in its formed state. Recognizing this as a curse, the residents carefully moved the items out and placed them into a newly built vacant house. During this process, it seems someone accidentally looked inside the drawers, but nothing happened. This is attributed to the fact that those who were conducting the memorial services were present. The vacant house was constructed slightly away from the town, and its lack of an entrance was explained by the idea that it wasn't a house meant for people to enter. An exit, the windows and glass doors were a part of the respect for the memorial, providing light and air. Thus, the whole town was informed that this was a house no one should enter, and it became a secret known only to the adults. This concludes the tale of the dressing table and the hair. The dressing table and the hair were possessions of the mother and daughter, Yachio and Takako, and the words were names given as secret names. How was it? If you have any other stories you would like me to introduce or any questions about the stories, please leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and stay tuned for the next episode.